All right, fantastic. Okay, so again, for anyone that's curious, again, that's my resume there in voice channel chat. I've been playing Kingdom Builders for a pretty long time, since about 2013. For those of you who might remember Game of War, I think it's now called Game of War Fire and Ice or Fire Age. I think it's gone through a couple reiterations, but that was one of the first ones that, the first major ones that released on mobile. And then since then, have played some of the more mainstream titles that you might be a little more familiar with, stuff like Lords Mobile, Rise of Kingdoms, Art of Conquest, a little bit of State of Survival here and there, and a couple others that I've dabbled in. But anyways, without further ado, right, our outline for today's show is going to be talking about managing kingdoms, and specifically how you as a player have not only a big role to play in how your kingdom, your server develops, but how a lot of what is currently being done in your kingdom, or may be being done, is already affecting you as a player. And most likely without you even knowing that these things are affecting you. It should also be noted that we are recording these as well, so even if you're not able to tune in now, if you're going to be able to come in later, I'll actually be recording along with giving some video too as well. So if anyone wants to watch the VOD, you'll at least be able to watch it with video. It'd be cool if they added something where I could turn on my camera and talk to you guys. I don't know if that's possible. I have to see. I don't think they actually have that feature added in yet. Yeah, they don't. So, yeah, that would be, I think, a little difficult. But if they do add something in like that in the future, I definitely will. So that way everyone can look at my pretty mug. Anyways, with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive in first. So again, like I said, we're going to be talking about the different managing styles and kingdoms and how they affect every player. Now, some of the most common ones that most of you are maybe familiar with, whether you are not, is going to be, for example, you might have like a council-like system, right, where you'll have a system of you'll have like one rep per each of your active or your top alliances, and then those people will be essentially your governing body, right? So you might have one equal vote per. They'll vote on things like major decisions in your kingdom or your server. You might have two or three reps per each of the top alliances there, depending on how many they allow or let in for their council. You'll also look at, for example, if you end up having a higher low council, right? So another type of structured system is where you may have this high council that might consist of two, three, four, five people that could be either one rep from each of the alliances. Then you have your low council, which could be, maybe your rotational leaders or reps, but not necessarily encompassing all of your officer or your management team within each of the alliances. And then they'll kind of be like your essentially voting kind of decision body making. And then the low council will be kind of where more so you start discussions out on. From there, when you look at where you're going for this higher low council system, right? Remember, there are pros and cons to each. You may also have a system where you might just have the number one alliance that focuses on being your governing body. Maybe they just don't allow anyone else in, right? So you could just have one alliance, two, or even three alliances, right? Any number could be the ones, right? I've seen some structures where, at least in IK, you might have what the top alliance for each faction, and they will be the ones who will focus on being your governing body. You might have a system, which for some of you that might be familiar with systems I run, right, where you might have one, two, three people, or even one person who's kind of like at the top in that kind of oversight, kind of final decision making position, and then you just have a council of your peers, right, a board of advisors, and you operate in that capacity, right, where here's where your discussions will start off on, right, you'll kind of do votes if needed, and when necessary, but you at least have that kind of foundation point that pretty much all the other systems encompass. It really just depends on what that kingdom and what that server, and maybe to a side extent, right, what that group is going in with, right, especially if you're a part of a jump project or not, and you're just kind of going in solo. So again, that kind of highlights some of the most likely systems that a kingdom or server will implement or could implement. And then, if I can, let me backtrack a little bit here on why it is that it's really important for players to recognize that you are essentially getting put into a system regardless if you want to or not. And this is why it's really important to have a good understanding on when you're playing kingdom builders, right? If you're someone who, and let me also preface with saying that if you are just a player and all you enjoy, all you get out of playing kingdom builders is just playing, that is completely fine, right? You do not necessarily have to involve yourself with any type of management, of getting involved in kind of the politics, right? Maybe some of the drama, if you will, engaging with others when it comes to those types of management personnel that may be in your kingdom or server. And you can just play, right? There is nothing wrong or any problem with that. And the majority of players typically will just do that by default. But for those that are looking to get more engaged, for those that want to be more a part of and included in either conversations or kind of be in the know for how servers and kingdoms are playing, right, that is something where not only those people, but even the people who don't want to, right, will still be and can be affected or just in that circle of how that server is developing. And I'll give you one example here. So let's say in your server, right, your governing body, however many it may be, decide that they're going to come out with some PvP rules, right? And let's say as an example, maybe one rule that's applied for this example server is that, all of your PvP is only in the forbidden zone, right? And there's just no free-for-all PvP, everything happens there. That's something that technically affects every player on the server, right? Even if you're someone who doesn't really want to get involved in any kind of server management, maybe you don't even necessarily read mails, right? Maybe you could care less to read mails, right? Whether that's a server mail, an alliance mail, maybe you're not even on Discord, right? You're just someone who only plays in-game. And so that's why it's really important, I think, for players to have this realistic expectation that when you are playing these games, right, essentially, the name of the game is a kingdom builder, right? It's not how I oftenly joke, right? It's not like a player progression building game, right? Those are parts of it, just as much as, your daily activity is a part of it, just as much as you deciding to, lead an alliance or be an officer in an alliance is a part of it. But you are playing a kingdom builder, right? The objective of the game, really in its most raw and native form, is to get access to developing the kingdom or the server, and so you can eventually be king or queen, right? Like that is something when you look at even just the chronicles for Infinity Kingdom inside of your city, you'll notice that eventually they all lead up to, right, you getting World Heart, you progressing in your COR, and you getting access to those kind of king, very light, mild, at least as it is now and how it stands, right, those management tools. And so that is really like the primary goal in every server or kingdom before you even get into things like KVK, before you get into things like your IB matches, right? That's really the core of these types of games, which is fantastic. Again, it's one of the things I love about them is that you're really able to build out this nation of human beings, right, so to speak. And an example I usually give people is if you look at, for those of you, I don't know for anyone here who's watches shows, for example, like Lost or The 100, right, or if you've seen these shows, right, but they're great examples of essentially what you're doing in a kingdom builder, right? You are taking thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people, and you are putting them on this plot of land in this kingdom or server, and you're basically telling them to just figure it out. And there's a lot of things that go into that, right? You will have to do things like build relationships, do diplomacy. You'll have to reach out to other leaders, right? You will have to try and communicate, coordinate, and work together in some form, capacity or another, right? Depending on obviously how much everyone in that kingdom is. So that's why I say that when even if you're just a player loading into a kingdom, anything that kingdom or server is doing will affect you in some way, shape, or form. And that's regardless if you have a structure in place in the beginning or if you do not. Because if you don't, then you're kind of more at the... Oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? You're at the behest of either your alliance's rules because of that alliance that you're in. So you kind of have to abide by what they're doing. Or if there's a group of alliances that have like a mini union maybe they're forming, right, you might have to abide by that or at least operate within their rule set. You might have rogue alliances that pop up, and if you join them, for the most part, it's usually no rules, just kill and have fun, but or have fun to them, I should say, right? Their form of fun, right? But you're typically just operating within whatever rule set the alliance has for you. And then if your alliance, as I said, allies with others, you form a union, maybe everyone gets together within the faction, right? Then okay, then maybe they'll have a larger scope of rules that you'll operate within. And that's obviously if you choose to and you want to abide by those. But that is why I say that even if you don't have a system in place, even if you don't have a council system, if you don't have anyone leading or speaking for the server of the kingdom, right, you will still, as a player, have to abide by some form of rule set. And that's why it's just important to recognize that as a realistic expectation, because that's something every player will have to operate or work within, right, or around, depending on your view there. Anyways, now let me see what else I have on my outline for my second point here. So again, I know we talked about some of the concepts. We're going to talk about kind of the pros and cons for each of these systems and thoughts on each. I know I briefly talked about, again, how you're starting out, how these systems themselves are already in place without you even knowing, as we just alluded to in the past topic. And then, right, how are these things going to, let me briefly talk about how these things, and actually, I'm sorry, before I even get to the next point here in our topic for today, are there any questions that anyone has on what I've just spoke about? Again, we're going to be talking about a few more points, but in between the subpoints for, or I should say the points for our outline for today that we're going to follow, right, our syllabus, if you will. Does anyone have any questions on anything I've currently talked about? And again, you can type that in on the voice channel chat, or if you want to raise your hand and you want to come on voice to ask a question, you're more than welcome to. Again, I just like to let people know that, again, we're only going to call on people that have been members of the Discord, not necessarily guests or new players that have just joined it. Let me see here. Alpha Omega. All right. Alpha Omega, I just invited you.
Hey guys,
Hey, Alpha, what's up?
how are you? How
Doing
are you, mate?
doing well, thanks.
Do you, wait, do you listen?
Sorry? Did you have something that I guess you wanted to add on, a question you had on something I
Can,
was just talking about, or
can
something to
you?
share?
No, no, it's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you okay.
Be- Because my internet is not so cool.
Oh, okay. No, that's no problem. I can hear you fine.
No problem.
All right. No,
I
no.
can speak. Listen to me. I can speak now, like now,
If,
because my internet is not good.
okay. Got you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
No, no problem. No problem.
Got you. All right. Well, hey, I'm just going to move you back to the audience. But like I said, if you have something you want to add on to anything I just said, or you want to come in voice, right, just feel free to go ahead and do that again. With that being said, let me see. I'm just going to check on voice channel chat to see if there's anyone that said anything here that I just need to not make sure I'm not missing, or make sure I am not missing here. Let's see. Add in WhatsApp. Chico, WhatsApp. Decker, WhatsApp. So Decker said, lost the 100. No shout out to the OG Lord of the Flies. I mean, touche. Yes, Lord of the Flies, definitely, whether we're going off the movie or, the book, then yeah, definitely that would be the case there as well for Lord of the Flies. Though a smaller group, probably more immersed. I think the visual aid of being able to go on something that's a little more long running to look at all the kind of landscape dynamics and how those things shift over a longer period of time and what people have to think about. That's usually just why I voice for those two shows. But you are not wrong. You are not wrong there. Okay. With that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the second point here, right? Which is right how will a potential current system affect your experience as a player? Right, when you are first joining a server, you're getting into a kingdom. Whether you've been playing there for a couple days, a couple weeks, maybe you're playing there long enough to where you start getting server mails out about things like structure, about how it's going to play out. Right, you will start figuring out and most likely discerning for yourself on what you will, what you may not be able to do, along with how these things will affect you as a player for not only your playing experience, but also how you might be able to progress, how you may level, right? What kinds of restrictions might be in place, and I'll give you some examples of these. Is that, let's say you are in, so let's say the group comes out, or I should say, let's just say the governing body, right? Males come out where they say that you are not going to be able to do any form of kind of free for all PvP to an extent, right? Let's say, kind of going back to a previous point we made, right, where let's just say all your PvP is in the Forbidden Zone, right? Let's say that let's say whatever server you're in, they just do not allow any. Or actually, I'll give you another example here, right? Let's go with like S1 example, right? Because I had recently learned this, is that if there's a server out there that operates where they just do not allow any PvP, right? Like any free for all PvP on the map, right? So everything is just organized, and like you either have to reach out to someone or you have to, and I guess that kind of leads into where I'm going to go with that. But let's just say that in the extreme example, you have no free for all PvP that is allowed on the map at all, right? Some of the hindrances here that you may find, maybe, and I'll give you the polar opposite as well, right? So we're going to give the extreme example, then I'll give you the examples on kind of both ends of the spectrum, right? So in this one, no free for all PvP is allowed, right? What are some of the challenges, right? And I'll put this to a question for those of you listening, right? If you want to provide an answer to this in the voice channel chat, what do you think are some of the challenges that a server or a kingdom may find if that kingdom does not allow for any free for all PvP on the map, just in Norheim? And again, feel free to write an answer, response in the voice channel chat. Okay, there's a few coming. Spooky says, no honor. What's up, Spook? Okay. Let me see. Ash says, lack of motivation, 100%. Will be Farmville sooner or later. Okay. Eden said, Ellis Rowe. Shout out to my boy Matt. Not sure if he's in the chat. Lake Man's a beast. Rogues ignoring. Okay, let me see. Ruthul says, Rogues ignoring the rule. Okay. Okay, let me see here. Especially if I be SVS, you don't have much experience in example team fights or one-on-ones. Okay. Okay. So a few coming out. I think Strick and Bash are writing, and then we'll provide a response. Let's see here. Motivation. Bash says some sustainable progress for all players. Okay. Okay. What's up, Bash? All right, so what I will say is I think the answers given are all forms, right? They're all factors that will go into, right, how that server or kingdom could play out, right? Some of the effects that could happen. When, in this example that we'll start off with first, right, where if you do not allow any free-for-all PvP, right, those I think are some of the cons, for sure, right? Where not only you may not get any honor, right? There could also be a lack of motivation. You could find yourself in a position where you might have a kind of unruly or maybe group of unrests where you're hearing kind of the chants and the claims of Farmville. You might end up getting into a situation where it kind of creates or maybe even motivates further, right, any current rogues or maybe new rogues, right, because they might feel that there is a sense of extreme limitation on what they can do. If you look at things like IB and SVS, right, as far as team fights, we'll talk about that, but I do think that is something that players can feel limited in possibly the amount of experience that they can gain, right, from just a kind of face value visual front. Besh said something about sustainable progress for players as well. I do think in some areas, right, depending on how it's handled, right, that could be the perception that some may have as well. What I will say when it comes to an example of having no PvP, right, some of the benefits, right, I do think those are some of the cons. I think another con is an example of just having to take kind of extra steps, right, where in that system, right, where you would have players or the rules essentially would be, you have to reach out to someone, you have to go and find people to do things like honor trades with, organized fights with, right? Obviously, it doesn't mean that you will never be able to gain honor. It also doesn't necessarily mean that the server will ultimately turn completely into Farmville. There's always the chance that depending on how it's handled, you may not appeal or maybe appease the rogue players, along with chances of just not creating more rogue players. I also think there's opportunities to do things like training for whether it's IBs or training for your KVKs and your SVSs. Of course, these things take effort, they take time, and they just take a lot of will because it is just something you have to put a lot of passion into and a lot of work into, right, to make these things happen. Some of the benefits I'll talk about in regards to that is that some of the benefits in that type of a system is that every single player is developing at a 100% rate. And what do I mean by that? Well, if they're by developing at a 100% rate, that means your prosperity is arguably always at 100%. You're able to full gather with bonuses at 100%. You're able to have buffs kind of unimpeded, whether they be from cities or other, at 100%. You're able to develop tech at 100%. You're able to try and work on having as much activity in your alliance, right? So you're probably not necessarily going to be losing activity in those kinds of an ideal situation, right? So because of that, you're able to kind of develop tech at 100% based on how many players you have in your alliance, right? There's a little bit of an asterisk there. Right, and so because, and then in addition to that, you're also able to choose the time in which you want to start gaining honor, right? Because I think, as most of us know by now, right, the amount of honor that you are going to gain is going to be a lot more, right, once your march is stronger, and then if you're, of course, matching up with other stronger marches, especially if you're able, even if you're just able to edge them out, right? Like, you'll get a lot more honor per hit if you're 100k and someone else is 90k and you're able to win, compared to if you're 50k and they're 10k. And so, because of that, it's one of the reasons why we recommend people to kind of wait until they're stronger. So that way you're getting more honor per hit, which also means you're saving an overall amount of action points that you're going to be expending to use per each attack. So, the example would be, you can make it to, if the goal is to try and make it to 5 mil for honor, right, which is your count 2 bubble position, right, because once you go past that, then you're arguably going to end up having to face the decaying rate at which your honor will be lost per day, right, unless you're consistently fighting or gaining honor per day to sustain that, right, and that kind of increases or decreases depending if you're a higher or lower rank after. So from there, right, we can make an argument where we say that, well, if I wait until I hit T5, I'll be able to get to 5 million honor, let's say, in 2 weeks, right? Just as a loose example, compared to if I'm trying to push 5 mil at T3, right? It's probably going to take me 2 months, 2 3 months maybe, to arguably hit 5 mil honor points, right? Just again, if you're just kind of going off using your average action points per day. So again, but at the same time, right, you can make the argument that, and I think another argument that can be made is that, let's say that you're just starting out in your server and you're a couple weeks in. If you start boosting honor early on and you're able to hit 5 mil points, work your way up the ladder where you are able to hit that count 2 position, maybe a couple months in, compared to if you wait a couple months and then you start boosting honor, right? You'll be able to kind of benefit from those increased stats and buffs from a higher nobility title earlier rather than later, but you're just going to expend more resources earlier on. So again, I think everything is a give and take, right? And I think you can easily make an argument for either side. But the thing is that is something that you're able to benefit more from in a system where, for example, you either don't, and this is just an extreme example, of course, in saying that no PvP is allowed, right? You can still do it with just pocketed areas throughout the kingdom of not having free for all PvP be allowed server wide. And so those are some cons, some pros. Now let's look at the polar opposite side, right? So now let's say that you are in a server where it's just server wide PvP. Right. An example of this would be looking at like Server 5. Right. Server 5 has been kind of the big staple for a long time. Now there's some other servers that are coming up, and even though they had been there for a while, right, Server 5 was always kind of looked at as the war server. Right. So now let's look at this example on the opposite side of the spectrum of, let's say you're in a war server constantly, right, where it's just 24/7 PvP, no safe zones. What do you think some of the cons will be, right? What do you think some of the hindrances would be if you're in a war server, right? And for those of you that want to provide that and answer that, please feel free to type that in the voice channel chat. But what do you think are some areas that would hinder, some cons, if you are in a complete and full war server? And devil himself. That, yeah, it's actually a good point as well. Obviously, D Brawler says large barrier of entry for newer players. Okay, okay. No, I actually agree with that. If you are in a complete war server, it would probably be more of a turn off to the game. I think at that point, rather than them thinking, especially if they're brand new, right? Usually, if you're brand new, you're kind of easily susceptible to your first impressions, and a first impression, if you get populated into a war server, and let me say this as well, right? The likelihood of a brand new server where it turns into a complete war server from day one is usually unlikely for it to happen that early, even if you have a group of players that come in where they say, hey, look, we're just going to do nothing but kind of cause mayhem and havoc, unless they have like 50 or 100 players that are just all going to be doing that day in and day out. You usually do not see that happening on a newer server. So the likelihood of them joining or creating an account on an older server, even though it is possible, we actually did this when I was on S8, running the project there for the time that I was there. Right, we actually promoted it for new players to join, and we actually got quite a few that did. Someone like Echo, for those of you who remember Echo Gaming, for anyone who did play on S8, right? He was a YouTuber. He came over and joined along with a few other people. I think Clash with Eric, who's a friend of mine as well, who played there, also plays on 79. He ended up joining S8 at one point, and a few other of some of the Clash content creators, and along with just other players that started brand new accounts there, even weeks after the server was already up and running. So I think, to your point, yeah, that is a challenge and can be one where you may not be able to get new players. Now, new players joining a server is always going to be the lowest amount. Typically, it's usually going to be primarily done just kind of through general migration. But if you are able to promote and market your server, your kingdom well enough, right, in certain ways, you can attract brand new accounts. But okay, so large barrier of entry for new people. Any other guesses on anyone? Right? If you were just in a complete war server, what do you think some of the cons are? What do you think some of the hindrances, some of the challenges are if you're in a complete war server? Duke says even the high spenders seem to not like the new skills and customs. Oh yeah. Okay, let me see here. Hang on, just a few more people typing in, we will give a response. Also, I think my dog is ready to get picked up. Oh, he is. Oh, fantastic. Good timing. High spenders. Okay, so Devil's sad. It will slow down growing. Andy Decker says, hi, doggo. It will slow down growing. Yeah, no, 100%, right? So I think that's arguably probably one of the biggest ones, is that it'll slow down overall progression, right? So if you are in just a complete war server, war kingdom, right, where it's just fighting nonstop, you're getting pillaged nonstop, right? You're getting your RSS taken, so that's going to slow down just your overall progression, because you're going to have to keep constantly gathering troops. Even your gatherers might get hit, right? You might not even have an opportunity to really gather at all, which means you might have to solely rely on getting income from your RSS buildings, right? As arguably maybe your primary source of income. And then your secondary source of income might be from whenever you're able to gather safely. And so it is just, and then on top of that, right, you have to fight for cities all the time. So that means you're never going to have consistent buffs. You're basically going to be fighting for COR all the time as well. And because of that, you're just expending a lot of unnecessary resource. You're going to have to expend more of your RSS items than you would. You have to expend more AP than you normally would. You're probably not going to be able to be at 100% prosperity. You're probably going to have to use shields. Eventually, you'll probably run out of shields, especially if you're free to play. You may also then run into a situation where, because you're down on prosperity, you're not getting as much generation from your RSS production buildings inside your city, right? So it's really kind of an overall encompassing challenge when you're in a war server. And usually the recommendation is that if you are going to join a war server, you should be someone that already has a main account, right? You're already leveled. to the point of where you may not necessarily be worrying as much. And more so, it probably is better really for spenders to join war servers more so than I would argue free to play, just because if you spend, you at least have a little bit more mitigation in joining a war server than you would if you are completely free to play. Now, some of the benefits, however, right, of being in a war server, and oh, sorry, let me read. Someone else just posted something too. Still growing. Speed up. Sorry, Duke says it depends. If you are a large player on a war server, you can raid and kill everyone, so growth can be sped up for you. Exactly, sped up for you, but that is true. And then let me see. Devil said, and there will be a hard fight. It'll be hard to fight in KVK when you are not united. I actually think that's a really good point that Devil himself from 85 brought up. Right, I think it's if you look at, I think a good example is that if you look at S5, right, and I'll just use them as an example right now, is that when their KVK came up, right, they were not necessarily united, right. You kind of had like Nuke, and then you had MG that even though KVK came up and they did participate, right, it was one of those things where because they weren't really united, they didn't really kind of see eye to eye on a lot of things, right. It limits how much communication you can do between each other. So, and then on top of that, right, would they be fighting in their zone 4, right, or in their zone 1 once they get into KVK? It's like they're just going to continue the war there, and then it's one of those things where like if anyone comes in, right, are they going to be able to kind of take their gates? Are they just literally going to fight for everything, right? There's just a lot of challenges that happen from those situations that, again, if you're not in a united server, or if you're just not able to kind of see eye to eye on things, that can really cause a lot of ripple effects later down the road. And it usually affects a lot more than you may see. All right, a lot of the unseen things is really what it will affect. Anyways, let me touch on just a few comments here in voice channel chat, because I want to bring it back to just to keep staying on topic, even though we're kind of loosely there on the border. But let me see. Ra from S8 says war server challenges come when you reach T5. The food being used is 2 mil. It's a lot, and troop training heal takes a lot of speed ups. True. Being in a war server, you can't probably even T5 because barracks cost 50 mil each, and if you're being burned, gatherers attack 24/7 is just impossible if you in a whale. I will say that it makes it very, very difficult to the point of near impossibility, or impossibility. Then of course gem usage, you need to buy AP, TPs. Yep, it's literally all encompassing. But do definitely agree there. Let me see. Spooky from 36 says, personally, I like to play in Farmville Peaceful Source for the first couple months of my account, and then migrate to 1. Okay. Rob from 8 said S5 is scary, nukes 5 million alliance. Yeah, that's just because the majority of them, I think, went to, what was it, 81 or 83? It's one of those that they went there. But the challenge is that they went there and basically turned the server into the exact same situation that S5 is in. So they kind of like, in my opinion, kind of wasted portals. Unless, again, most of the people that they spend. So to them, even though I might view it like that, they might view it as, oh, well, we're just spending money to kind of hop from one server to another server just to keep fighting, keep gathering resources. It's almost like, oh my God, what's that movie example where you have, I don't want to reference Eternals because I don't want to give any spoilers away for anyone that hasn't seen it yet. But let me give, I'll give you an older one. Right, if you look at the movie Green Lantern, right, with Ryan Reynolds from back in the day, arguably a cult classic, depending on how you view it. But Parallax, right, who was like the evil person, right, he would essentially go from planet to planet, harvest resources, and then move on to the next, right? And that's kind of a view that you can argue kind of like rogue groups have in common that they like to do. Or I should say some may like to do. But yeah, so with that being said, again, everyone likes to play the way that they like to play. Let me see. Sniper Whale Killer from 27 said, for war free-to-play players, the worst is AP and also TP. They're just so hard since limited gems. Also true. Decker from 107 says, so many interpersonal conflicts is something that can happen from constant war. No, I agree. Let me see. Fighting over cities equals unable to rack up alliance coins. Equals shields have to be bought for gems. Yep, that's true. Even portals too as well if you eventually want to migrate out. So... let me see. Newgate, what's up? Says, in IK, you create your own currency by farming. If people don't farm, RSS is not made. So I think, I think when it comes to being in a war server specifically, yeah, that is an immediate challenge where you just may not be able to farm. I think if we're looking at it generally speaking, which is probably a topic for another time, but again, anyone can farm. A lot of it just kind of comes down to, a want versus a need, where you might have some people who want to gather resources faster so they can level up their cities faster and other buildings, but do they really need to at the cost of what may happen to other players on the server, right? And obviously depending on the server that you're in and how they govern, but at least when it comes to a war server, yeah, that in and of itself I think is probably one of the hardest and most immediate challenges and hindrances that anyone would find there. Jesse Lucifer, thank you so much for providing the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern gif. I appreciate. Let's see here. Never use shields. Besh says if develop peace equals 13 players using T3, then war server 4 players using T4 to turn off and cripple the players. Guess who will win? Manpower much more than important buffs. I think when it comes to KVK, that probably is a topic in and of itself. I'm just a big believer in activity. Usually always trumps power. However, with an asterisk there, because I do think rally leaders are needed at times. I only do it if it's really close to me. You got it. All right, let's go ahead and continue here. Happy to be able to answer some of those. So, again, kind of staying along the lines of... Oh, God, hang on. Where's my thing here? Uh-oh. I just had my posts. Oh, hang on one sec. I think I just lost my really, really big posts. Oh, I thought they were there. Uh-oh. Maybe they just got deleted. It wasn't by me, though. That's fine. We'll look at the announcements to go off our outline again. With that, right, we were talking about kind of how the system is going to affect you as a player, right? The two parallel systems we talked about is what happens if you're in a complete conservative type server where there's no kind of free-for-all PvP allowed, right? You just kind of have to rely on organized PvP and what the pros and cons are there. And then what happens if you're in a server that's just free-for-all PvP everywhere, right? No save zones, then what are the pros and cons there, right? And then how does that affect you as a player depending on the environment you're in, right? Now, these are pretty much kind of complete polar opposites. There's a lot of middle ground here that you'll find depending on the server, the kingdom that you're in, but it at least talks about a little bit of that. Now, because again, I do kind of want to end with talking on the pros and cons of each management system, but the next thing we'll briefly talk about, right, is when a kingdom starts, right, where, as far as attention-wise, right, when you are looking to kind of build your management style, right, or your structure in a server, right, just to kind of put this question to the group, right, where do you think, or what do you think, is the most important area or thing or action that needs to be attended to, right, early on? And you can make the argument throughout, right? But what do you think, and maybe I'll just ask it generally, right? What do you think is the most important area that needs to be focused on when it comes to being able to kind of build out your structure, build out your system, right? When the kingdom is just starting out in the beginning, right? Where is the most important attention needed? Better start grabbing 1.85k gems. I know, right? Okay, let me see. Devil himself says communication. Okay. Very important. Very important. I would, if anything, while others are typing, I would challenge you, Devil, to expand on communication, right? Like, how would you do it? What exactly needs to be? What would be your process for communication in and of itself, right, early on when you're trying to kind of establish whether you want to view it as your hierarchy or just kind of your governing body, so to speak, within the server. Besh says, at the overall relations of people. Okay, no, I mean that is true as well, right? Obviously, you have to care and you have to take into consideration, right, as many players, if not everyone, in the server when it comes to how you are going to build out and try to establish whatever structure, right, you might be looking to implement. Niedecker says, most important consideration of starting a new kingdom, division of land. Okay, got it. We're going with kind of the city distribution route here. So division of land always gets the most attention, causes the most conflicts. I don't know if it's the most important, but it is the most contentious topic, in my opinion. Okay, so I think Niedecker's point on division of land is definitely very important. I think primarily and usually mainly because sometimes it's a visual. I shouldn't say sometimes, but it is a visual cue, right, for many, where if you look at how easy is it to get to certain areas in the game, right? If you think about zooming out, clicking on the map button, right? Those are pretty simple and kind of fast areas that you can get a lot of information in a short amount of time, right, for the average player. And because of that, how you're distributing land and cities, right, as a visual aid, right, as a visual cue for how that server, that kingdom is developing, can actually tell you a lot, right? If you notice, if you see, one faction has double the amount of cities, double the amount of land than another, okay, well, maybe that indicates that, the server isn't really kind of focused on balancing out distribution, or maybe you have one alliance or a couple alliances within that faction that just want to try and grab as much land as they can, right? But that also can be telling. Maybe you're doing it where you are seeing that land is being grabbed, and kind of what we now see and have been seeing for a while is in most servers kind of operating within the standard kind of 1/3 split. So maybe you'll see land, maybe you'll see the majority of green, blue, and red all kind of in their third corner. Even if there's some trickles here, you can then kind of discern to yourself and say, well, okay, it looks like maybe they're kind of going for this even map split, right? Even if there's a few stragglers here and there. Maybe you're kind of doing the rainbow assortment of cities, very similar to like if you played in a server a server for a project that I ran going in, where you might just kind of have this wild like rainbow sherbet assortment of just cities here and there, right? It might you might visually look at that as maybe there's some dysfunction, right? Maybe it's just a free for all or something all the time. And then for the people that ask, they might be like, oh wow, well, maybe there is some method to the madness. But visually, and at first glance, right, these are what most likely the majority of people will look at, right? That's probably what they'll think, depending on how they're seeing territory not only being gathered and taken when a server is starting, but how that might lead into what their impressions will be kind of going forward. So yeah, I think city distribution is very important. Best says alliance leader relations. Yeah, no, I agree there on the leader relations. I think it's very important, right? If you are trying to make any effort, he was nice that I reading all that. That's okay, Kiwi. If you're here, I'll read it for you. Get him. With that being said, I think it is a lot that we're right when you're communicating with leads early on. I actually think that in my humble opinion, I would say, right, for the amount of kingdoms I've managed, servers I've played in, I actually lean a little bit more in the direction of finding that reaching out to leaders early on is arguably the most important thing that you want to do in the beginning, and I'll explain why in a few moments. I just want to get through a few more of the messages here. Let me see. D Brawler says identifying the preferred play styles of the players in the server. Yeah, I think that is important. The challenge there is just knowing what are their play styles, right? Because you kind of have to wait for the server to develop a little bit to see kind of who's going rogue, who's not. As far as without reaching out and kind of speaking to everyone, right? And there's not really an ideal way to kind of gather that information in the server just as the current tools stand, right? You would probably have to do that in either kind of like a stat mail from multiple alliances, and then pull all that data together. And then unfortunately, you can only run a 12-hour stat mail. It'd be better if you could run a 24-hour stat mail, so that way the data can be a little bit more accurate when you're pulling that information. If you try and get as many people on Discord as you can, that can be one way to kind of get a soft gauge. You can do things like sending feedback forms or anonymous feedback forms via server mails, right? That's something that we've done for the time that I was in S8 when we were in 36 and 79 for my projects, right? I think those are great things that you can do as well to try and kind of get those water temperature gauges on certain topics, right? For something like that for players that have their play styles. Let me see. Devil said you need to create a system that everyone enjoys the game. Not just spenders, but also free to play. Oh gosh, let me see here. Sorry. And also spenders, not just free to play. So many free-to-play players put much more energy than spenders into the game. So we need to build a fair system for everyone, and this can be done by implementing some rules. So yeah, I think in the beginning, when the server's starting, I do think that actually is something that is important, that you kind of are transparent and you clarify to the server. Usually that's done at a later time, not necessarily in the very beginning, but I do value that highly as well. Decker says, personally, I think early established protections for free to play and low spend players seem to determine a server's longevity. Decker, I actually think I think the point you made, even though I think it can be expanded a little bit, I think at its core is actually a really great point to bring up. And I think kind of goes more into not only the longevity, but just player retention within servers. Because again, right, if you want your server to last, you have to retain players. You can't just be losing people like a landslide, right? Whether they're quitting, they're restarting in a new server, they're migrating out, right? Kind of anything in between. It is very important to have a high level of player retention within your servers. And a lot of how you can do that is actually from the beginning. Let me see. Roth 8. Okay, here. Kiwi, I'm going to read this for you because I'm your best buddy. Let me see. Roth says, most important thing, it depends a lot if you want to rule the server, aka having one or two big alliances, or make the server long lasting. Find whales, as in 136, many alliances have died because they didn't have any whales, which makes it a lot harder to compete with whales, and especially if you don't have Earth players. Recruitment is a good one too. First 3 to 4 days, recruit always when you can and make contacts with other alliances. Okay. Players to join into your alliance and why. Point out good things. What makes you better than the other one? I could say I'm a veteran. I got knowledge when playing. Then the last one here is gather around level 1 city ASAP. It's crucial. Okay. Yeah, so I think, Raw, for those things in the beginning, right, when you're trying to implement, your system for the server, usually, and let me kind of say this above all, right, which would probably be my number one pro tip for those of you that are still here and tuning in, is that if you want to, right, if you want to try and implement a system, right, if you want to implement some kind of structure, you have to have enough cash, enough clout, right, enough presence in order to do so. And that can be done in a couple different ways, but you need to have enough of it. And one of the challenges that every server starting out will always face is that without knowing, right? If we're kind of going off not knowing how many similar alliances or maybe multiple leads are starting out if they're a part of the same group, right? The base assumption is that every alliance that's starting out in every single new server across any kingdom builder, this is always going to be the case, is an individual player, meaning that they have their own thoughts, they have their own knowledge, they have their own experience, and they are separate from any of the other alliances that are in that server or kingdom, right? And that's, of course, as I said, right, without knowing anything beforehand. If you never spoke to anyone, you get into a server, you're a week in, no leads have talked to any other leads, right? And you have these 100, 200, 300 alliances that have all been started, right? We cannot assume or even fathom to know what another individual is thinking, how do they perceive the game, what's their ideal for how they want to build out the kingdom, if they even have one, have they even thought about it, right? Does it line up with mine? Do we find certain areas or topics that we're agreeing on or not, right? And that's kind of how you're starting every server off with. So that's why, even though it is important, kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier on. Gosh, hang on. Who provided that point there on reaching out to alliance leaders? So Besh did, right? So Besh made that mention of alliance leader relations, right? Even though not necessarily saying like when to, but in the beginning, yes, right? This is the most important thing that I feel, because whether you're an individual alliance, whether you're coming in as a group of alliance leaders, whether you have a jump project and you're joining on like day 12 or day 13, right, with your players, right? The most important part is establishing early relationships and starting through introduction, right, via communication, to start building rapport and get to an actual starting line point with leaders in the servers, right? Especially, right, I would argue like the top 20, top 30, right? Because most likely, whoever they are, probably going into like the first week, probably a portion, if not a good portion of those alliances will most likely carry over longer into the mid game and probably the late game as well, or at least I should say have the highest chance to. So that's why having those early relationships, kind of getting people. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would be amazing if we could do like a group chat, right? If IK had this ability, and this is actually one of the things I've suggested to the team, is it'd be great if they had like a friend system in the game, and then you could add people and then make group chats right in the game. This is something you could do in some other Kingdom Builders, but that would be fantastic because that would allow for you to have a group chat in game with players being able to use the translation features without having to necessarily kind of set those up externally, right? If you're on Discord. In addition, let's say you have international players that might be in a country or living somewhere where they may not have access to Discord, or maybe they just don't want to get on for that reason, right? Having those tools offered in game can actually help out a lot. So again, the importance I think of reaching out to leaders initially is something that is extremely important if you're looking to set up any kind of management system, and it's something that can also later have those ripple effects for how it would affect you as an individual player as well. So again, doing those early reach outs I think is drastically and very important. Let me see here. Okay, awesome. Just a few more here, and then we'll finally get where I'm at. Oh, I'm at 50 minutes, man. If my buddy Ghost was here, he'd be so proud that I'm like attempting to keep this at an hour. Let me see. Nedecker said here, I find that many free-to-play accounts are backed by their main accounts that were spent on. Yeah, definitely a good amount. So that those free-to-plays may surprise you when migration opens up. Let me see. LMD, Lord Mad Dog, what's up, says, giving ill-equipped... let me see here. Ill-equipped pay-to-win leaders with great ideas. Oh, sorry. Giving ill-equipped pay-to... I'm sorry, I got to read this again. Sorry. Giving ill-equipped pay-to-win leaders with great ideas, NASTi, is like handing a spaceship to a toddler. My apologies. At the same time, though, I do hope that anyone, if not as many people, do find the information that I'm providing to be somewhat useful in any capacity. You said you've got to have the qualities, leadership skills, and virtues to make a server work. I actually think that is very true. A server is only worthwhile if the person reading the responses cares. Oh gosh. Oh god, LMD is just tugging on my heartstrings right now, man. I wish you guys could. I wish they eventually allow stages to incorporate video, so you guys could see like my reaction. But yeah, I mean, I think in short, yes, that no matter what, right? I think that kind of falls more into the sustainability of where you get hit by hit me in the feels. It's so emotional. But yes, no, I think in short, right? I think LMD hits on some really good points there. Is that and again, this is beyond kind of in the beginning, right? This kind of falls really more into once you actually have a structure in place, you have your system in place, right? Then it really becomes more about sustainability and maintainability within your kingdom, right? And that is really where the people who are leading your server or your kingdom, whether it's the leads, whether it's your oversight, however your system is set up, that is really where you will actually start to see kind of the true colors, if you will, of people that are in your leadership teams, right? And kind of what their decisions are. Very similar to if you're someone who pays attention to politics, right? You're probably someone who pays close attention to how your senator, how your governor votes, right? And are they voting in line with what they're promising you, with what their vision for what they marketed themselves during their campaign was for, or are they voting in contradiction of what they promised you, right? Are they essentially being hypocrites in lying, right? And it's kind of a similar situation when you view it for kind of your internal server management, is that are your leaders, right, voting, or are they being consistent and aligning with what they promised, with what the vision is that they wanted to create, right? With maybe what everyone was kind of working towards. And are those people still following along with that? Or are they changing their tune? So I think to LMD's point, right, I think that's a very important topic. Something, again, that kind of goes more later down the road and not necessarily something, like we were talking about for the topic in the beginning, but I still think holds extreme levels of value. That is really important, because if you don't, let me just make one brief note here, because I don't want to get too far off topic. But one brief note to hint on that is, caring about a response does not necessarily mean that the response, the suggestion, the idea that you're being given should immediately translate to us kind of becoming like the Jim Carrey yes man, for example, where we're kind of doing like the widespread Oprah thing where it's like, yes, I like that, let's implement it. Yes, I like that, let's implement it. Yes, I like that, let's implement it. No, right? Caring can essentially mean you just hearing, reading, listening to everything, and then being willing to have conversations with people in about their topics, about their suggestions, about their ideas, right? And really kind of play those things out. But I do think it is important at its base level, right, where we do care enough to read everything, to listen to everything, and to always be open via from your availability and your accessibility as a leader to sit down and have conversations with people, right, that want to. Because I think those things are really important. I mean, you can look at an example of how many servers out there, and again, this will be the last thing I'll say because I do want to get to the next part here, which is kind of talking about the pros and cons of each system. But the last thing I'll say here is if you look at how many servers or how many kingdoms hold weekly town hall meetings, right? Where they'll do like a voice meeting on their server Discord or their kingdom Discord, right? How many kingdoms out of the current 141 kingdoms, or let's just say out of however many from after their first COR was done, right, hold weekly like voice meetings like that, right, for their entire server? I can tell you it's not a lot, right? It is a low amount, and you can usually tell that based on things like server mails, right? Do they promote those things there or not? Right, and but even something like that is an example of showing that you as a server, as a kingdom, care on another front, right? You like there's another way of showing that you do care, because you're being willing to kind of hear, read out thoughts, suggestions, feedback, right? You're willing to engage and talk with people, and just not every server does that, right? You will have some, of course, but the majority of servers, in my experience, at least from what I've seen, through having an account in every server, right, the majority just do not do that. But I do think those are good things to do to kind of hammer on that. With that being said, does anyone have any questions on what we just spoke about there for that portion? Because then next we will be going to the this will be kind of the last one here. I know we just kind of talked about, right, like what's the most important thing in the beginning, right, to focus on if you're trying to kind of build out, establish your structure, right, for whatever your managing style is going to be in the server. Like I said, the last thing we're going to touch on here is going to be the different systems and then specifically what their pros and cons are in each of those systems. And I'll try and keep this one a little bit shorter. But before we do get into the kind of the final topic of today's show, please, if anyone does have a question on something that we have talked about or what we just did talk about, please feel free. And I'm actually just going to look to if anyone has a hand raised. I apologize. I know I haven't actually been calling on that as much as I'd like to. Let me see here. X9. Let me invite X9 if he's still here. So, and like I said, I'll also be reading the voice channel chat. So if anyone has a question or something to share based on that most recent topic or even anything we've covered so far, please feel free. Otherwise, like I said, I'll give it about a minute and then we'll get into the last probably big topic. X9, what's up, man? Welcome.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, I appreciate the insight. One of the things that you haven't talked about, and I would say this, I'm currently in server 9. So shout out to the guys over there, UWS, Wet, as well as my parent, Judy Phoenix, with their adjacent Phoenix Academy Phoenix. One of the things that you're alluded to in regards to players' development, also when there's a war zone, that some players, they actually want to, play the actual game itself, which also the Chronicles. So, those are the things that also are free to be a part of. They want to actually go off stories and attitudes that and also go along storylines. And there is also a story with, Marine, but I noticed that you call it Kingdom Builder, so I was not familiar with that terminology there. But also, like that, what other programs are you guys on? Because I noticed that I recently on Discord, and I see a lot of other people myself was actually interested in it, probably have something a little bit more valuable
Sure. No. First and foremost, thanks, Nine. What I will say, and I apologize, like 9/10 of what you said, with the exception, I think, of the ending part, was what I did hear. It just sounded like the mic was a little bit laggy, or the connection just might have been a little brief, a little staticky there. At least for the majority of the beginning part. I didn't want to interrupt. But if you're able to kind of type out what you said in the beginning, I heard something like storyline that we were going with. I'm not sure if anyone else made that out better than I did, with the signal losses and the codebreaker memes that are now popping up in the voice channel chat. But I think I might be able to comment on the last part that you asked about. But if you might be able, whenever you have time, to write that out in the voice channel chat, or if the connection improves a little bit, at any point, if we're still going on, then please, if you can, write it out. I'd love to obviously be able to get to it and answer it here while we're live. But if not, then you could feel free to message me separately, or if you want to type it out in the voice channel chat while we're still here, if you're able to, of course, and not driving. Safety first. But the last part, I think you asked about kind of where we are when it comes. Sorry, as far as when it comes to any kind of programs like this, or any kind of events that we're doing. I think that's how it sounded to me there towards the end. What I would say is, first and foremost, I appreciate, and if that was kind of more of a nod to enjoying these types of sessions that I do in this series, then I definitely appreciate that. It's something that I should say, have always wanted to do for the community, and I very much appreciate the mod team, along with Vita, Pio, and Gilgamesh, who've been very big supporters of this initiative that I've been wanting to do. Oh, sorry. Spooky says, I thought he asked about other apps we use for the game. Oh, in that case, never mind. I'll stop making it about me. If that's the case, then other apps to use for the game, if you're saying like outside of... I mean, I'm not sure if you're going with emulators. Oh, I see. Okay. No, there's no problem. I'm happy I was able to get that part out, Gogo. Thank you for showing us Mr. Reeves, the lovely man. You said, oh, sorry, outside of Discord. Got it. Well, so yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I personally think Discord is probably the most ideal. I mean, you might be able to use something like a Facebook group or Facebook chats. You might be able to use something like, oh God, what's the thing? Like Slack. I think Slack is another one that some people use. So I think things like Slack, maybe if you want to go as far back as using like Skype or TeamSpeak, I just don't know if those are really going to be the most ideal for kind of setting up a community type environment. I think doing something like kind of a Facebook, maybe like a Slack, could be something that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure if anyone else has, and again, let me be specific, right? I'm not necessarily saying that, I personally think Discord is the most ideal app to use. I think that's why the majority of us use it, because it is so inclusive and it's so dynamic in what it offers us when it comes to tools and what we can do with how we communicate and how we disseminate information. But that's not to say that I don't think that other apps either do some of those things, if not might do all of them, but maybe just to a lesser degree. Yeah, like something like Microsoft Teams is another example. Some people said Line. I think those are some other things that can be utilized. I'm just a big fan of Discord. I mean, I've used all of the ones that people have mentioned. I just like Discord because it just has always felt like it's been more of a community, like a true community that you're really building it out in so many different areas, right? Because you can do the same thing on Facebook, but as far as when it comes to kind of building a community out, but I just don't think that like a Facebook group has as much tools and utilizations as Discord does in probably almost any capacity. So I'm interested in how structured. Yeah, I wouldn't know. My recommendation is that if you're interested in any of those apps, I would just go on YouTube and just type in, what is Slack, or learn how to use Slack, something like that, or even just Googling it to figure that out. Sorry, let me see here though with the other parts. Let me see if I can. Okay, sorry. So X9 said, I'm just opening up his DM real quick. So he said what? He said, "Yeah, no offense. What platforms are you on? I'm beginning to get discouraged by just listening, and others wanted to make a comment, unlike the guy that you had invited to speak, but just didn't say anything. I think it was just more of maybe just him testing his mic out. And then he said, sorry, I had an incoming call. Oh, got it. So you're saying what platforms am I on? Okay, so I guess it kind of was what I was leading to in the beginning portion. So yeah, I mean, as far as platforms that I utilize myself, mainly for the most part, I would say Discord. If you're asking like where you can find me, or kind of again if I'm like on Twitch or anything like that. I mean, I have an account, but usually if I've only ever live streamed once, 1 or 2 times from my YouTube channel itself. Something I would like to get into more, but I just need more free time to do those things. So as far as kind of what you might find me using the majority of the time, it most likely will be starting the live stream. Yeah. Again, I'd love to. I think I only did it once, and the one time I did it was for the S9 for the global release event that we did when S9 was released. But outside of that, yeah, no. I mean, I'd like to get into it a little bit more, but for the most part, you'll probably find me more so on Discord than anything else. I'd say Discord and my YouTube, at least again, if you're just asking for me. Apologies. So before I get into the pros and cons, because that's going to be our last topic for this segment, I just want to catch up real quick on some chat, because some people are pinging me with what it seems to be discussed. Need Decker. First off, I love the memes. And Bernie Sanders is absolutely fantastic. Once again, ask you to take Boss Nasty's server management advice to heart. Yeah. I on a note of that, what I always tell people is that, there are multiple ways that you can manage a server. You can manage a kingdom, right? There's never going to be one surefire way that is going to just far and above exceed the way that you do it, right? Because you can find levels of success in different styles, right? I've seen servers that run a council system that have been wildly successful going into their first KVKs, especially for my time playing other kingdom builders. I've seen a fewer and farther systems where you just have like one person kind of running the show as far as kind of like decision maker. And I've seen those systems be successful. I've seen low-high council systems be successful. I've seen 3 alliances that just run the entire show be successful, even if they don't allow decisions to be made or decisions for the governing body by other active alliances, right? So it's not to say that I think one system is works better, and above all, I think it really just depends on the group that you're with, what you are kind of what you have experience with, what you're willing to sometimes try out. Because remember, even if you're just briefly talking about it from like a jumper project standpoint, typically it's one person that starts out with that idea, and then that idea expands into, okay, well, let's start building something out. Let's start figuring out how we want to set up policies, standards, how we're going to manage events. Okay, now we need to start recruiting people, right? And then you'll start recruiting leads and officers. If you're looking at it from the opposite end, where you're just going into a new server as a leader, right, as an individual person who's deciding to lead an alliance, and everyone else are individuals leading their own alliances, you do not have any relationship with these people from day one, then a lot of it comes down to how are you going to operate with those other leaders, right? How are you going to try and get on the same page? Because you might find yourself in a very slippery slope situation where you might get into a conversation with 10 or 20 of the top alliance leaders, and everyone just has their own viewpoint on how they want to manage the server, right? And that in and of itself is a very challenging position to be in, because then over time you'll start kind of getting like the mini groups to form, right? You'll find like maybe 2 or 3 people here and there that have similar views, so you'll probably like naturally gravitate towards these people. You'll try and start like these inner groups, right? And it's almost like, to an extent, you are starting to form your own project within the group's landscape. I've seen this happen so many times, where you get into a server, everyone is their own individual alliance lead, they all have their own thoughts, and then you just start finding people that view things in similar ways that you do, and you'll naturally start kind of grouping together, and you form these internal groups. And then over a period of time, the largest internal group will probably start making a play for like majority presence, right, to kind of be that governing body. And then sometimes and this is fewer from what I've seen, maybe they're okay with the status quo, right? And when they do votes and things like that, they just all vote the same way, right? Kind of like how you have your Republicans and Democrats, right? Except you just have, more multiple groups than that. So yeah, it's rough. Sorry, let me answer one more here, which is, someone said something about leadership chat. Hang on, I'm missing something. I thought Besh asked me something here. I just want to make sure I'm not missing this. No, LMD was. I see. No, LMD, no worries, man. LMD says wasn't trying to devalue you giving out advice. By the way, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, definitely wasn't taking it as that. I understand what you were saying though. Besh. Okay, here it is. So Besh says how to minimize bad leaders' influence. Huh. I'm gonna be honest. That is arguably the $1 million question. And I probably would say I would probably say like the Hillary Swank $1 million baby / $1 million question. What I would say to that is let's just operate under the assumption that the leaders in question, or just any general leaders in question, right, truly have ill intentions, right? Like let's at least establish that first and foremost. And so if we're operating under that example of these people truly have bad intentions, they are not doing things that are in favor of the server, they're making decisions that other players even in their own alliance do not agree with, and they kind of just essentially, in short, they want them out, right? What I would say is how to minimize that is and again, let me give you the two polar examples here. If you start off at a brand new server, you arguably have no way to minimize that. And that's mainly because that is operating under the assumption that the people that are leading those alliances, if they're active and they're growing, are most likely not going to give up their position, right, as leader in the alliance. So I think that first and foremost has to kind of be stated, is that that's where those realistic expectations come into play, right? Because if you're a leader, the only way for you, for the most part, to limit your or to kind of be realigned, if you will, is you either would impeach them, but they have to be inactive for that, so that's unlikely. They would have to be willing to give up their R6 position, which the highest percentage chances is that that's unlikely. Even if you banded the entire server against them, or not necessarily against them, but just in favor of that, right, you still have to rely on the fact that they have to willingly give up R6. You could do the other approach, which, bear with me just a moment. Okay, sorry, I just had to blow my nose real quick. Right, and then you could take the other approach where you just get everyone to leave that alliance and then they join other alliances, right? That's one way, and to probably a greater extent, probably the best way, really, to kind of eliminate, right, kind of killing a couple birds with one stone. Where if you get everyone to leave that alliance and they go join another alliance, they're kind of left there by themselves, right? Then you can maybe keep some farms in there, maybe hope that they go inactive to where you can later impeach and get access to the shell. Right? I mean, these are just a couple ways to go about it. But yeah, I mean, if you're starting off at a brand new server where all these individual players are starting their own alliances and they eventually carry over to, being in those positions of decision making, kind of, governing body of management, then the options you have are somewhat limited, because as far as minimizing their influence, right? And bear in mind, I'm just talking about leads, right? You can also make the argument that, let's say you have some officers that, are spreading, malarkey, if you will, or they're spreading, disingenuous information or views or outlooks, right? Then that, for the most part, is a pretty easy fix, right? You can demote those people, right? If they're literally, if they literally have ill intentions and they're just being, they're kind of more of a net negative rather than a net positive, right, then you can demote them, right, remove their access on Discord, demote them from your in-game as an officer, right. Those are a little bit easier. But if we're just specifically talking about R6s and leads, then the challenge also has to be that everyone on the server of the kingdom really kind of has to unify behind that, right? Or at least the people themselves that are in a position of managing the server and kind of leading the server to do so. So it kind of has to be, somewhat of a unified and coordinated effort that you do, right? If they have bad influence. Now, if you're in a situation where, let's just say, you think one alliance has, like for example, you might as an individual feel that these leaders, that this leader in particular, and or more, might have bad influence on the server, then what I would say is it could also just be a case of that maybe you just don't agree, or those players in question just do not agree with the current system that is being implemented. This actually happens more often than not, right? Where you'll have a portion of players on every server, it could be individuals, it could be groups, that just do not believe in either certain things that are being done, certain rules that are being put in place, maybe certain ways of managing events, maybe just how that governing body is governing the server, right? That they may just not agree with. In those cases, my recommendation always is going to be first and foremost is to leave the server, right? If there is, like, if for example, if you've done everything you can, right, where you've spoken with the leads, or you've reached out, right, they've kind of given you their explanation, right, you've heard them out, it may just, like, and you've done everything that you can when it comes to trying to understand the system, trying to understand whatever's being done that is being done, so you can wrap your head around it, and anyone else can, to see if, is this something I'm going to enjoy, is this a server or kingdom I'm going to enjoy playing in, or do I need to consider my alternatives, which may be either just lowering expectations or just operating kind of within the status quo of the server, or just leaving, right, and migrating out. Because that's something that will always be an option, hopefully, to everyone. But again, I guess without knowing more specifics on kind of the, bad leaders' influence that you're referring to, Besh, I can only really kind of give general, kind of broad advice or recommendation. Oh, sorry. Ilwin here said an app that connects with in-game chat so you can talk without being in the app. I don't know. But if you find one, that would be awesome to do. Sorry, I know that was a little bit higher up for that. Give me answer. Said he was going to give you $1 million. No, it's a movie, million dollar baby. Spooky said, make a council chat, show how they are wrong or wanting to do harm to the server, and expose them in front of everyone. Spooky going for the airing dirty laundry approach. Okay, that could work. Hopefully it doesn't set a precedent for others who might view you as being the person who airs dirty laundry to other people. Right? Pros and cons to everything. And also just depending on the group that you would release the information to. Mad Duck says, if only it was that simple. Because they work for me. Relevant to the discussion of bad leadership. When the king sets the migration cap to 2 million power, day 91. Yeah, I would say, I would say that is probably a prime example of poor leadership, and that is only specifically if they are, if they're setting it like that and just leaving it there, right? If it's something there, if it's something where they're just opening it up for a short period of time to let some people in, that's different. But if they're leaving it open for an extended period of time, then yes, I would make a strong argument that at face value that appears to be poor leadership. Okay, now let me get in, because we're at about an hour and 18 minutes here. So let me kind of get into wrapping up some of these other points, because I do need to go and pick up my doggo and do a return. But if I can, let me get lastly into probably the most important part of this session, which is that, the pros and cons of running different leadership styles or different management systems. And so when it comes to different management systems, let me first start off with the kind of standard council system, right? And this is regardless if you have. Well, I'm sorry. Let me specifically say this, right? It is regardless of how many people you have. Rizzo, what's up? And so again, it is dependent on that. But let me start off with just like a standard council system where let's say you have one rep per each of your active alliances, right? The first thing that comes to mind is the kind of too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Argument, even though on a very lighter version of that, because you may only have one rep per each of the alliances in your council. Some of the other cons is that in this type of system, things like discussions most likely will last longer because the requirement is that everyone needs to either be involved in a discussion or the majority, depending on how you establish it. We'll just kind of operate under the conservative view of that everyone has to participate prior to kind of everyone voting, right? So discussions may take longer to happen, meaning that things like votes, then later on decisions, will take longer to implement. You may put a minimum in place for things like votes where you might have to have a 12 or 24-hour period that elapses, right, depending on what conditions you set. So that just means that a lot of things are being delayed, right? If you're essentially kind of requiring everyone to engage, or even if that is your requirement, and then everyone submits suggestions or ideas, and then everyone votes, right? And then you have your period of time where if you're going to draft a mail to send out, everyone has to look at it, everyone has to approve it, right? It's just essentially more hoops that you have to jump through, which usually translate to just delays that happen. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but I do view it as when it comes to things taking longer than maybe they could, right? That might just be more simplistic to happen, that can in a shorter period of time. I personally view that as a con. Secondly, right, and that obviously depends with an asterisk there, right, on how much time you have as well to do these things. Because obviously the sooner the better, right, where that may not necessarily apply. And then some of the pros, right, for running a pure council system is, again, kind of operating under the one person, one rep per, is that, everyone gets an equal vote. Everyone, I mean, for the most part, right, no one I don't think would argue that no one does not have an equal say. I don't think people would argue that no one does not have an equal opportunity to provide a suggestion or piece of feedback. But predominantly, the most important part there is that everyone has an equal vote, meaning that you either would do something like until enough votes have been cast to where a majority is there, where the other side couldn't outvote them, or until everyone has voted, right? That's really where your kind of council system more so comes into place in that regard. And then you get to, let's say you have 2 or 3 reps per council, right? Now you're really kind of getting more into the, in my opinion, a little too many cooks in the kitchen type of, or just a lot of cooks in the kitchen approach. Now, I do want to preface with, again, I've played in all the systems that you're going to hear me talk about. And I again, whether you're doing 2 reps or 3 reps per council, at that point it's almost kind of becoming like a mini / more condensed version of like your officer chat, for example. And usually the more people that you add, the more discussions that are going to happen, right? The more people that want to voice their thoughts, the more people that want to give their suggestions, give their ideas. And all it means is that now discussion is going to take longer. It'll take longer to eventually get things like suggestions and options provided. It'll then take longer to do votes. Whether you do one rep or one rep per alliance can vote, or everyone can vote, right? Everything at this point is just now going to take longer for things to do, right? Where you and let me preface with saying that even if you're running, a council system, remember that, right, the speed, right, or the pace at which things go are completely dependent on who is managing expectations in that system, right? Who's kind of being your God, what's the word I'm looking for? Who is being your God, whoever the person, I'm forgetting what they call them, but the person that would be the the kind of the manager of those conversations, or someone that kind of keeps the conversation flowing, kind of keeps the direction heading. I'm forgetting the word for it. I know there is a word I could use for it. I can't think. But a facilitator. I guess a facilitator to an extent. Yes, I will use that because I think that's the best word that I can think of right now that's been presented. So thank you. Yeah. So right, having someone who's kind of facilitating those conversations, right, managing the pace of those, right, and making sure you're kind of staying on track, it would obviously be extremely important, and I think very helpful in those systems, right, so things kind of don't get out of hand or take longer than needed. Then we eventually get to the system where, let's just say you have, three alliances, right? Or sorry, let's talk about like the high-low council system, which could arguably also be made to say that you're just having, however many people are on the high council are really the people that are going to be essentially your decision-making body. So you're going to have conversations and suggestions and thoughts and ideas start off on kind of your low council, and then decisions will be made by a group of 3, 4, or 5 people, right? That each just kind of have a single vote. Even if you have more than 3, 4, or 5 active alliances that are in the server, right? So pros there is that now, for example, things like decisions might actually speed up a little bit, or maybe kind of return to a normal pace, possibly a little faster than what you may get if you're running 1 rep per alliance in council, kind of the one overall. Your discussions will most likely still take about the same amount of time. Suggestions, feedback, hearing from everyone is probably still going to take about the same amount of time, just depending on if you're running 2, 3, 4, 5, however many reps per council. Because typically, if you're running a high-low council system, you're usually having more than 1 rep per alliance, right? Usually, at minimum, it's 2. And then you're having your, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many that are in your high council system. So in this, it's kind of like an abridged version where you're making slight modifications to try and speed up things like decision making and when votes will occur. So that's one of the benefits, I think, there, and then kind of going over some of the consistent challenges or hurdles that kingdoms may face. Then we go to probably the next most likely system that you'll see ran, which is maybe you run into a situation where the top single alliance, maybe the strongest alliance in your kingdom, will be the one to make decisions and kind of be that governing body, right? Which is kind of more in the, I actually refer to that kind of more as like what you would consider to be more of kind of a dictator like role or position for your hierarchy in a kingdom. But you might have something like that where it's kind of like, hey, whatever we say is going to go. We're not going to talk to anyone. We're not going to take feedback. We're not going to conversate. Right, and that can potentially kind of lead you to like the war server state, which is and can happen, but is also something I've seen done before where you have, and this is very few and far between, let me say that first and foremost, but you may run into a situation where something like that happens where the strongest alliance just wants to be the one to kind of run things. And it doesn't happen all the time, but probably more often than some may think. The challenge there is that, sure, decisions are easy. Information that they're sending out on decisions is easy because it's all being ran through one person, right? So the pace and speed at which things will happen will be a lot faster, right? But it will be devoid of any inclusion when it comes to your community, your player base, other leads, other officers from other alliances that are essentially not yours. And that can more likely than not lead to turmoil, to say shortly. And then let's go to probably the last most likely seen system that you may run into, right? Which is, even though this is still few and far between as well, is kind of more of a system that I like to run, and that for those of you who've played in kingdoms that I've managed and built initially from the projects that we've done, is a system I like and favor, specifically because of the unique position that I find myself in, and I've seen others as well, is where you might have, for example, kind of one person in the, what I refer to as like the oversight, kind of final decision, final call maker if needed, and of course when necessary, but then you still run and operate with a standard council system, right? So you have it where everyone provides their feedback, everyone provides their suggestions, normal discussions happen and are done throughout your kind of day-to-day activities and operations. And then, votes will happen, right, if and when needed. But you basically have someone there who has, a certain level of what I would refer to as like knowledge and experience, and is wanting to make sure that the oversight of whatever goals, right, whatever vision the server has, and by extension, this really should be applied to everyone, but that you're basically having someone in kind of this objective position that can kind of be viewed as a tiebreaker of sorts, but more so as someone that is just unwavering in sticking to the ideals and the goals that the kingdom is going in, right? That the server is going in. And so I'm a fan of that system, but it also is something that can really only be done, in my opinion, with, like I said, people that just have kind of I don't know if I'd say a wealth, but at least a minimum level of knowledge and experience, because they have seen a lot and they've played in a lot of different systems, and they more so understand what they're going towards, right? And you can make the argument, right, even though that's what I like, you can still make the argument of applying the same person and the same individual in said position, even if there's someone that just truly believes in whatever system, whatever, or I should say, whatever vision, right? Whatever the server kingdom goals are, whatever the rules are, right? Whatever the kingdom is striving to eventually get to, right? In the late game, you can put this person in that position, right? And say, essentially, you are here to make sure we do not stray off course, right? That we stay on track, that we do not contradict our ideals, right? And what we have promised the kingdom, what we're promising the server, that is a very big part of how I feel about that. But that system is still very few and far between, right? You're not going to find that system as kind of the majority. Usually it's kind of a council variation for what you most likely will find in most kingdoms. I personally have just tried every variation of a council system, and I've seen them work very well, and then I've seen them not work very well. I think that's just one of the benefits of when you've done a lot of jumper projects like I have, and you've been in a position to kind of lead and manage kingdoms and servers. You have an opportunity to try out a lot of different things. So for me, this is just what I personally like, because of how I just find myself in kind of in this unique position that I do. And so I think some of the pros for that system is that you can have decisions made at arguably the fastest pace that you would, right, if you were kind of having one or even two alliances there at the top, right, if, of course, as always, right, when needed, but you still have the same benefits of enjoying the same pace that a discussion or a conversation would involve itself in, right, and for me, and again, let me preface as well, right, even though I might view it as kind of the best of both worlds, it is not something that is ideal, right, for every single server, every single kingdom, right, I would say to do, right, unless you kind of meet those prerequisites and those requirements that I feel are very important if you're going to be in that situation. Because remember, if you're going to kind of adopt this type of system, you really have to kind of be like the Joan of Arc, right? You got to be Jesus in his, physical form, right, where literally nothing wavers you and what you are fighting for the server, right? Like, you basically have to be, that shining beacon of light, so to speak, where you are completely objective, you don't favor anyone, and you have to always kind of be pro server, right? That's the big one there. You got to be pro for the server, and not pro alliance, not pro whale, not pro best friend, not pro a group here or there. Like, you literally have to be pro server, and arguably everything that you do, right? But more specifically, pro server based on what the visions are and where that server and what the server's direction is going in. So, that's the most important thing there, right? But some of the cons to, I think, a system like that is that, again, you just have to make sure people are on board with that before you kind of do those things. Because if not, it can easily be viewed, just like if you're running the one alliance system that's basically just making all the decisions, right? People can, easily kind of start, doing the dictator rants, or that, no one else has heard. These are all things that, I've heard before as well. Usually it's from people that don't typically kind of understand the system, or if they haven't played in it long enough to see, what the benefits are. And let me point out as well, this applies to all systems, right? You can easily have anyone that comes to you in the same exact way that they would come to someone else in their own system, right, or another kingdom, right? And a lot of what it comes down to is just, and I think someone here in the call said this very eloquently before, is that a lot of what it comes down to is being transparent, right? You have to be upfront and public about how you are doing things and what the plan is, right, for the server or kingdom, depending on what you name it. And if you can do those things and you can reiterate those over time, where it never kind of gets lost and out of sight, out of mind, right? Those are really important things if you want to kind of work on your building blocks for what would be sustainable and what would last. And with that being said, that kind of rounds out my last point there for the session. Okay, at this time, I'm going to hang out for a little bit longer. I know we're at about an hour and 35 minutes now. So if anyone has any questions, any thoughts, please feel free. This is definitely the time to ask them or to share if you do. And I'll be reading the voice channel chat along with if anyone has a hand raised as well. Where am I going? Oh, let's see here. Some people do have a hand raised. I don't know who had their hand raised first, but I'll call on Lord Bane first, and then Decker, you're next on deck. No pun intended. Unless we're cool with pun intents. So. Oh my God.
Hi.
Bane, hey, what's
Hello?
up, man? Welcome.
Thank you. My question isn't related to the topic. It's what we were discussing earlier. If it's okay if I bring that up.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
The schedule for the castle decorations for the Golden Path. I was wondering if anybody in the audience had ever seen it.
Got you. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm just going to move you back to the audience. I know a little bit loud background noise there. But yeah, I know someone was asking about that before. And so if anyone does know, please feel free to post that in channel. Jesse says, no Golden Pass is changed randomly. Okay. That might be the answer. Unless anyone else has another view there or may know something that we do not know. Nee Decker, you are up next. Oh, I'm also so hungry. And I cannot wait for the next episode of Boba Fett to come out next week. Shout out to my boy Mando in the call.
Sorry, hi, good morning.
Hey, what's up, Decker? Welcome. Morning.
Hey, welcome. Hello. So I had a question. I know somebody had asked earlier about what other apps that you use, and you mentioned Discord being kind of like your go-to. I'm working on 107. We don't really have an out-of-game space currently where everybody can sort of meet and congregate. So I'm kind of working on putting that together right now. And I just wondered if you could speak to sort of the most important aspects of that. Like, I mean, we've got a translator set up where I worked on putting together some, like announcement channels for the king. So if alliances have their own private Discord, then they can share those into their servers. But yeah, just sort of as far as engagement, I'd really like to hear about that, and sort of like the organization of an alliance Discord server or a whole kingdom Discord server. If you could have if you had any tips or tricks or advice, I'd really love to hear it.
Okay. No, sure. And I appreciate you coming on and asking. I'm just going to put you back in the audience now. What I will say there is, let me start off with kind of the Alliance Discord portion. My general view on, if we're just specifically talking about utilizing Discord outside of your kingdom, my recommendation is to not have any Alliance channels within your kingdom Discord. And the reason I say that is because I've been in kingdoms that do that, and the challenge sometimes comes down to comfortability. And what I mean by that is if you're the only admin or if you appoint admins or other people that have additional access, you might indirectly or directly infringe on another alliance's category that might just be for them. So my recommendation has always been to have alliances, of course, set up their own discords, and I think you might have mentioned that as well. I just wanted to generally say that. And then for your kingdom discord, right, I think it's important that, for example, I know you said having a translation channel. I actually think that's fantastic to do. I think it's really important. One thing you can even do is have a channel set up that has, maybe it has something like, the 10 or 20 most used languages in the world, right? You can like Google that. And then you put those there and you just tell people, hey, react to this, or, you can put, or you can just have a post that says, hey, if you do not see your country or language flag here, add it. And then if we get, a couple people, or maybe you set a minimum or something, then you can say, okay, right, then we'll add a translation channel. I think having a translation channel for your world chat vastly important, right? So if you have a general world chat on your Kingdom Discord, I think that's very important to do. I also think it's important that if you have anyone in your management, right, as an officer or lead, if they speak another language natively, then I think that's just as equally important to have that. An easy way to do that, if you haven't used Rita Bot, which is RITA, Rita Bot is fantastic and basically does exactly what you're looking for. Unless you already use it and you have it set up, then you're good to go. But I would say those things are very important. So, having... So like I said, if you have... I think the most important channels that you need translation bots for, or translation channels for, is World Chat, arguably your officer chat, and then depending on if you have any R6s or council members that speak different languages, then you might extend it there as well. But I would say those are the three most important chats that you would need a translation for. Outside of that, I think having announcement channels obviously is important. Maybe you might do something like having departments. Actually, if you're curious, there's a video I did on my channel. It's actually for another games series, but one of the things I talk about, and you can search this, I gotta find where it is though. It's for another game I did, but I basically did like this jumper project series, and in one of the videos I actually talked about how to build out your Discord, like your project Discord that would eventually transition to your Kingdom Discord. So I think that would be a really good video to watch, and you can just type in like jumper project series. I gotta see. Give me 1 second. I should be able to find whatever the name of it is that I set. Okay, so it's called... Let me see here. Yeah, it should be... I think it's part 3. Yeah, you can just type in setting up your Discord on my channel. And then you'll find it. Yeah, that's a great video to watch because I actually really walk through a lot of those things. So yeah, like I said, I think it's important to have announcement channels. I think you need department. I think, again, if you guys do departments, I think department channels are very necessary. Obviously, having your management channel set up for your officer, your leads, having channels set up that kind of go over your overview, what your goals are for the kingdom, I think are very important. I think having like one of the things I like to have on our channels is kind of like a translator channel. So we'll do like a channel, and then we'll basically ask people like, hey, if you speak another language, are you, and you're willing to volunteer, some time whenever you're free, do you speak another language? And then if so, right, are you willing for us to add you here? So that way, it helps kind of twofold. One, it helps if you actually need a translator, but two, it also gives you an idea on allowing other people that speak other languages to maybe meet up, right? Maybe they'll find, oh, cool, wow, there's like 3 other people that speak Japanese. Awesome. Let me go make some friends that speak another language, right, if they're bilingual. So it can kind of serve a multi-purpose, but I think having a channel like that is important. I've used that multiple times, right? If you're in game and you're, maybe you come across a leader or an officer or a player that again, you're maybe just having trouble with translating, and you can figure out what language they speak, bam, I can go there and get a translator. Sometimes having a translator speak to them in their native language is a lot more comforting, and most of the time players will appreciate that. a lot more because they'll think to themselves, wow, well, I should say, hopefully they'll think to themselves, wow, this person went out of their way to find someone that speaks, my language. I really appreciate that. Now they can also have a more fruitful conversation with said individual or individuals at that point. So I think, yeah, some of those things are definitely needed for sure. Sorry, let me go back and see if anyone had hand up. Okay, no. Sorry, someone else. I think someone said something else here in the voice channel chat before we kind of round out here. Really awesome to see that there's still like 24, 25 people that are hanging out us an hour. And I was really surprised that we ended up getting like what it felt like almost 100 people on that kind of initial wave. And we were hovering kind of right around 50, 55. Really cool to see. Because there wasn't that many when we were initially starting out. So maybe I will kind of bring this back and turn it into a weekly thing. But sorry, let me read some of these chats here. The list goes on. You said you got Jake Bot developers working on request divide by language. Oh, cool. Yeah, if that ends up working out, that'd be interesting. So I know Rita right now I think is used by most. Takes a little bit of coding, but still can be ideally set up for what most people want to use it for. But yeah, if Jake Bot gets something language wise, I might check it out too. Let me see. LMD says a lot of the problem with positive server discussion is past toxic behavior and personal attacks. Would it help to have some sort of mediation from other more experienced leader servers? LMD, what do you mean there on? Like, sorry, are you saying like just general positive server discussion, or are you saying like actually having positive server discussion like on your Discord? I mean, if you're just asking about like general positive server discussion about like the future and kind of where things are, and if you're saying that the people that are in or if you're saying that the people that kind of have to be in those discussions have past experiences with one another where maybe it's not the most inviting environment or appropriate environment to kind of have those conversations, then yeah, I would say having a mediator of sorts or someone to mediate would probably help a lot, especially if it's something that you notice is happening with consistency. You said if what you said is true and factions have their vision of how they want the server to go, isn't it always going to result in one vision winning out and the rest leaving? I mean, to be fair, for the most part, yes. Right? I'll say that just blanketly. But that in and of itself is a realistic expectation that people have to have. And let me also preface this by saying it doesn't mean that everyone's going to leave. Right? You will have people that will stay. But for the people that really, and I'll give you a better example here. Let's say you have two jumper groups, and one jumper group wants the kingdom to be full PvP, and the other group doesn't want there to be any free-for-all PvP. Those groups that land in that same kingdom are essentially going to fight for who has majority control. And then usually whoever ends up getting majority control will end up, right, whoever wins from the fight or war will then be in that position to kind of, manage and kind of put their rules in place for the kingdom, right? Because they'll be the largest or biggest group that's able to enforce, right, if you want to say it like that, right, or support the server in that direction. However, if it comes out where, it's one faction versus another faction, then yeah, the same exact thing could happen. It doesn't, however, necessarily mean that every single player may leave, unless literally everyone in that alliance, feels that way. Like, yeah, we're fighting for this, and if it doesn't work out, then we're just going to leave. Then yeah, of course, that can happen as well. But that, I would say, is more so just a standard expectation. Like, that's something I've seen play out in quite a few servers. I've actually seen that play out in quite a few servers, new servers or new kingdoms with multiple jumping groups going to the same kingdom. Which is one of the reasons why when I do jumper groups, I like to coordinate with the other jumper leads that are going, so we can make sure that we have different landing spots, which is extremely important. Edo36 says, I feel like I'm in a college course online, and I love it. Yeah, stick around, stick around. Yeah, I often joke with people that they should like hire me on the master class. Well, I think that's what it's called. It's the one where you have like Steph Curry, Gordon Ramsay, and a few other people. That it's like whatever that website is, like a master. I think that's what it's called master class. Yeah, I mean honestly, there's so much. God, I feel like I have Jimmy Neutron brain blasts often. There's just so much information inside my head when it comes to Kingdom Builders, and it's probably just because I love this genre so much, and I like just doing research, and I like expanding my viewpoint on, what I might think is fantastic to do, and I think it's just important just to always kind of continuing your education. But again, majority and just with understanding, the majority of people aren't going to do that, right? Majority of people come on any game to just play. Kingdom Builders are a little bit more unique in that regard, very similar to kind of what you might define or refer to as like an MMO as well, right? Where you have kind of guilds, alliances. It's just in Kingdom Builders, right? You're essentially put into one kingdom, right? It's not like you have a whole world. You literally have, in essence, a finite amount of space, and you literally are forced to operate or not, right, within the confines of that space or kingdom, to try and work things out, right, if you're able to. And so I think that for me is what's so appealing, because you get into a new kingdom and you're basically building out a country, that has everything that you would eventually need, right, to kind of sustain yourself and self-govern. So for me, I actually just think it's extremely fascinating. It's one of the things that really attracts me to this genre of games. So, anyways, yeah, I definitely appreciate the college course line. That's funny. But if anything, I'm glad for anyone that's enjoying anything that I talk about. If you find it valuable or useful in any regard. LMD says, I think that's what I mean, talking about the future when so much has happened in the past. Yeah, I mean, again, sometimes that can be hard to overcome. I think it's also one of those things where, if you're in a situation like that, as I said before, a big portion of it is that, you usually have to, you usually have to, yeah. So I think the important part here, right, is just recognizing in any situation, right, where you are, and it sucks to kind of say this, but you kind of have to recognize where you are in the food chain, right? If you're just an individual player, and this is just a realistic expectation to have, if you're an individual player, or even if you're a few, and any of those players feel that, what has happened in a kingdom or what has happened in a server is just not to their liking, or maybe, and that's regardless if the governing body is making good intended decisions or ill intended decisions. It's important to recognize, do you currently have, right, do you have any kind of majority presence, or ability to factor into those decisions, or even decision making that's happening, right? Because that's another big part. And if the answer is you do, then okay, right? Try and obviously work things out. Maybe doing the mediator option is something. Otherwise, if you don't, then the option at that point is either kind of work within the status quo, or migrate out, or gosh, what's the other one? Sorry, or go to a new kingdom, right, and try and build something yourself, right? Maybe you go and you try and start up your own project, right, and you go to a new server, new kingdom, trying to build out what your ideals are, So I mean, there's options out there. I think the challenge for most players is that, and I think generally is that we don't really want to leave our home server, right? We don't want to leave our home kingdom in which we're at, because that's where we started. Especially if we have a level of attachment, if there's friends that we've made in the kingdom, if there's people we still talk to, right? Again, that can also be difficult to do, but you know, a time I imagine is eventually going to come where are people going to get kind of tired and sick of kind of being in that status quo, and if so, because again, I just remember, if whoever usually is in kind of majority control or has majority presence in a kingdom is usually going to be the ones who are kind of making policies, they're making decisions, they're setting goals and standards, how you're going to do manage anything, essentially. And so, with that being said, that's why it's really important to if you are someone who views, and that's one of the things I always tell people is that because in every project, I mean, I've ran 7 projects myself, right? And I don't know, I think someone might have deleted it. I actually don't know, but oh no, they didn't. So yeah, I still have my. Oh, never mind. It's still here. I just couldn't find it. But even if you scroll up a little bit, and I'll just give a little message link here in voice channel chat. But I posted like what I feel is my resume in Kingdom Builders, and I've done 7 projects, like big projects myself. My first 2 I did in another game, and we recruited, or I should say I recruited the majority, pretty much everyone. I recruited 800 players in about 2 weeks. Now that's a lot, right? To recruit, because at that point you're pretty much having to average about, what is that, 25, 30, 35 people a day, right, that you're bringing in. And we ended up converting about 450 in our first project, 400 in our second, to the final kingdom. And so, when you have that many people, and on top of that, we ended up having, I want to say it was like 7, I think it was like 9 alliances the first time. And then, no, I'm sorry. We had 12 alliances. 12 alliances the first time. Later turned into, I think, 15 about a week later. And then the second project, we had 8 or 9 alliances going in. That later turned into 10 alliances after the first week. Right? So, I mean, you have to consider, that's a lot if you kind of compare that with what the norm is, right? What's the average amount of alliances that someone would manage or kind of lead, and it's usually not that amount, right? Like if you ask most people, they would probably just tell you that's too much. For me, I just always wanted more, right? I just always felt it was very important to have as many active alliances going into a kingdom for some of the obvious reasons. But anyways, I don't want to get too far off track. I think that probably rounds it out for me. I'll give it another minute just in case if there is another question, whether it be from a hand raise, if it's for something that someone wants to ask in the voice channel chat. Again, covering anything that we've talked about today for this session, please feel free. And like I said, I'll give it a minute, and then I will kind of say my closing goodbyes, where you can find me, and then I'll end the call, or I should say end the stage. Because I need some food. Gotta go pick my dog up and make a return. Let me see. Gilgamesh asks, how much do you love me on a scale of 10 out of 10? I don't want to say that is a biased question at all. But yeah, I'll say that much. Let me see. New Tucker says, what gives people feelings of power? Lord power, troop power, the friends we made along the way. 100%. I mean, I think if I leave y'all with anything, what I will say is that, kingdoms, in my opinion, are not really fully built until you have a active and engaging community that can go along with it. Many players play these games because of the community aspect, myself included, right? If I wasn't able to engage and talk and interact, just like with you all here, but specifically within a kingdom that I'm in, right, in the capacity I like to play these games within, then yeah, I don't think I would enjoy it as much as I do currently. Yeah. So. Yeah. Kusi, thanks. I ooh you too. After I finally learned what that meant. New kids like not sure you get the results you want that way. Yeah, that's okay. Not to say that Google asked a loaded question, but it was, if anything, a fair loaded question. So. All right. Well, look, fam, that is going to be it for me. Let me see where we're at right now, time-wise. Oh my gosh, I'm pretty much exactly at 2 hours. I also want to share that I have, like I said, I know I mentioned I've been recording this meeting as well. In that same time, I've actually had my camera on too as well. So when I upload the VOD for this, you're going to be able to see my facial reactions and, you know, if anyone cares enough to look at my mug. Just wanted to make a note that if you do watch the VOD, it'll have a camera attached to it. So that could, I'm sure, provide some level of interest, depending on those that may be. But I am going to go ahead as of now and